Welcome to the Alfa Romeo Museum. It is the 48th edition of the Backstage, and again, we are devoting the Backstage to an important anniversary. It is an important anniversary as all the great victories of Alfa Romeo are, but this is one of the most heartfelt because it is one of the more recent, and also because there is a series of values, including beating the enemy at their own location. So we are here to tell you a nice story, and as always we start with a few images coming from 1993. So the images are the images some of you might recall and probably go and watch again and dream about sometimes. But the DTM was not an adventure made up of wonderful competitions, but it was a feat that Alfa Romeo at one point decided to take on, because that's how races work, to promote the brand on a difficult market such the German one, and to launch a model that the year before debuted on the Italian Championship with the 155 GTA. It won and started to be famous. So the DTM arrives as a great challenge because it's a new championship with a new regulation, and then there was a massive commitment because there was a team developing from scratch a car. There were 4 pilots with an official 100% official team and another team official at 99%. They go to Germany, and then there's a lot of things that we all heard about. We know about the victories. 14 wins is the record of the championship. No one won more before or after. 11 of these wins are attached to Nicola Larini, who broke many records, fast trap, pole position, etc. We know a lot about the car. We've seen it and we see it every time you come to the museum. It's one of the cars that cannot be replaced in the museum, because immediately the public asks, where is the 155 GTM, if they don't see it. We know that it was 2,500 four-wheel drive. We have some technical data. We will discover more today, but it's a car that we know in general. We know about the team, and it is something that today we will mention many times. In fact, it was the victory of a team, not of a single pilot or a single car. But it was a feat involving a group of persons who, united by passion and by incredible skills, were able to build, to test, to a car and to win a championship. And we also know that it was not only competitions. Alfa Romeo invested in everything. They arrived with everything that a racing team must have in order to be protagonists: a hospitality, logistics team, communication team. So, a series of activities that were used to make an official team out of the Alfa Corse, which was created in Germany. But this comes with a cost. It was very expensive at the time for a national Turismo championship, but it also had some returns. Not returns of, oh yeah, I heard it, the brand was relaunched in Germany, but the return is measurable through the press coverage and through calculations. At the documentation center, where we have part of the documents that you can see today, there's a review pertaining 1993, summing up very shortly how the press reacted. This is an excerpt of the first pages, only for the Italian press, and the numbers are incredible. But these numbers should not be taken by themselves alone, but compared to another series of parameters. And one of the most interesting parameters is this other chart, highlighting the overlapping between the DTM competitions, the competitions of other national and international championships, and what happened in general in the motorsport world. So the Mansell accident, the MotoGP, the World Championship, everything that impacted on the visibility of the GTM. In this review there is no conclusion, but it is evident that the DTM was a positive experience, which started to have some returns. And by joking with one of the speakers yesterday, we were saying probably this is the chart that Bernie Eccleston saw when he decided little by little to acquire the DTM championship and have it a world championship, and dream to have it as a side show to the Formula One, and then he changed his mind at a certain point. But let's take a step backwards and talk about the team. This is a picture that we know very well. It was on the cover of the special number of Il Quadrifoglio, celebrating the victory. Posters were made, press campaigns, but the team is what allowed all this, allowed winning, and also allowed Alfa Romeo to amortize those investments that were massive. And as always, the team has to speak about these things, and today we have incredible guests. So I would like to invite now on stage the absolute protagonist of that season, Nicola Larini. Good evening and thank you. So if you want to take a seat, I'm now inviting on stage all the other ones. Giorgio Francia, who apart from being a pilot, is a person who also built the car. Welcome, Giorgio. Giorgio is a friend, but after 1970, well, you participated in the construction of most of the Alfa Romeo cars, so you are an admissible element. And then the other protagonists, Pino D'Agostino, who developed the engine of this car. Also, in your case, it is not the first time you come here. Enrico Alviano, another person who on the Quadrifoglio was one of the 7 golden men of that team. He dealt with the electronic part because the DTM was an open championship also from that point of view. And then I would like to ask Rudolph Jansen to come on stage. He is an expert of DTM. He came expressly from Amsterdam for this conference. He's like an encyclopedia of this series of cars, the serial numbers, he knows everything. So apart from your memories, it is also important to have like the notary saying whether what you remember is true or you forgot something. So let's start from you, Nicola. You won 11 races. You broke all the records. How did this adventure start? Well, of course, it was born in the previous year when Alfa Corse decided to officially enter the world. Well, again, because it was already present at the end of the 80s. They were already present in that world, but then there was a break and I started again with the GTA project in 1992. So I was full-time occupied by that because I decided not to go on with Formula One, also because I had this opportunity with Alfa Romeo. And Giorgio Pianta bet on me and he wanted me to be one of his pilots. So, starting from 1992, we had this collaboration, even though I started collaborating with Alfa before in '87 in the Turismo Championship to support Giorgio and many other pilots because I was the youngster, recently arrived in the competition world. So I was the one who was used, I will say, to support other pilots. So I participated sometime in their activities, but I already was in Formula One. So I did like 3, 4, 5 races per year till in the end I was, let's say, hired full-time from 92 onwards. So as you said before, 93 and DTM is a consequence of the projects and programs of Alfa Romeo. Now, honestly, I do not remember whether when I was hired by Alfa in 1992 there was already the DTM project alive and kicking. It was starting, but I didn't decide to go with them because it was already fixed. Probably it was still at an embryo phase, but I liked the idea of Italy, of running. There was Giorgio, there was Nannini, there were the 4 cars. So that's when we started, and as I said, the DTM arrived immediately after. When did you drive the car for the first time? This one? Yes. I don't know. Well, for sure in Balocco. It was in Balocco. I'm sure it was in Balocco. Because that's where... Well, he was the one who did everything, actually. And I'm grateful that he created a winning car as the previous one. But I believe that the first time I really tested it, it was on the proving ground of Fiat. Well, at the time, it was only Alfa Romeos. And then, of course, the Mugello, because it was our home track. And then you went to Zolder and you attached 2 big Alfa Romeo snakes on the door. Well, it was an anomalous competition. I don't remember whether the qualifications were on the wet track, but it was, yeah, it was a wet weekend. We had four wheels drive, and despite my interpretation, so I know I could manage the car even better than all the others. That's why I did a double win. But I also owe that result to the fact that the atmospheric conditions, the weather conditions were favorable for the car. Even though I won on every ground, not only on wet ground. But it was a fantastic weekend from the pole position to the rest. So, I heard from all our guests that the atmosphere was very warm in Germany. Was it the same after the first victories, or did it cool down with the competitors? With the competitors, you say? Yes. Well, you know, we were the usual Italians, so to speak. We were not highly considered. I still remember an episode at a restaurant in front of the Hockenheim racetrack. I don't remember who was there, but for them, being in Germany with Alfa Romeo, the Alfa Sud with the rust bubbles, for them Alfa Romeo was that thing. Like, where do you want to go? What do you want to do with the Germans? So we tried anyway. The nice thing about Italians is that they know how to solve things and do things well in their own way. I know very well the German technology, their philosophy. But we said, okay, let's give it a try. And I think that after the first competition, Sawan was humiliated like the coyote, Wheeler Coyote of the cartoon, and they understood that we were not joking. Giorgio. Okay, when in your presentation I put this car because I like to have a car without all the designs, etc., because you work a lot behind the scenes. When was the first time that you drove the DTM car? Well, for sure it was in Chivasso, I believe, because in Chivasso we assembled the prototype and we had the racetrack. So the first tests were done in Chivasso. I'm sure it was a Chivasso Balocco Mugello. If I'm not wrong, this is the development of the car. And at the Mugello, of course, if you run fast and the car behaves well, then you could go all around Europe or the world with a competitive car. And what were your first impressions? Well, my first impressions, well, maybe Pino can tell me that I immediately started analyzing certain elements, but the great advantage was that the engine was like an airplane engine. It was a four-wheel drive, very balanced. It came from the basis of a previous year car, which was fast, but we made a further step forward, and it became a car which it didn't understeer because it was a four-wheel drive, but it was balanced, and you could run fast both on wet but also on dry ground. But before we were talking about the team, and you told me 3 times it was thanks to Giorgio Francia that we had this great climate. He chose the right people, an Italian team who could not create problems but solve problems. Yes, yes, we have to give credit to Giorgio. He created an Italian team, but a team with no internal rivalry. Okay, we could discuss among us to solve the problems with this engineer. We also had fights sometimes because maybe my defect was that I was very straightforward. I didn't say, well, maybe no. I said, this is not going, let's try and solve it. So they trusted me a lot, because probably they knew I was good, but it's their task to say that if I was good, but it was a team working together with that rivalry to have a result. I raced with them, and Nicola can testify, I never had a problem on the fact that I tried to have a faster car than theirs. There was no reason, there was no willingness. My goal, it was my job, was to be faster than anyone else. Of course, if I won, I was happy, but if one of our cars won, I was happy as well. So when we were racing in Germany and winning the championship, well, it's the merit of the entire team and also my merit. So you were not rivals, you helped each other. And we were rivals, but rivals in a good way. Of course, if I had to do something bad, I did something to the German car, not to one of our cars. But that was normal also in the German team. They didn't let us overpass. These unfair tricks existed, but even when there were meetings to understand the different problems, there was never a problem of saying, okay, I have to shut up because otherwise I would not have the advantage. Now, the advantage was winning, the team winning. Whether it was me or one of my colleagues was the same. And then the team was exceptional, from the engineers to mechanics. They worked day, night until the car was not competitive and ready. Everyone stayed there. But talk about the Germans, there was also a German among you. And he wanted to send us a video. Everything is positive, even though there's something for you, Nicola. Welcome, everybody. Welcome to all the Alfa Romeo fans. And welcome to all the people who are watching because they are interested in the Alfa Romeo DTM competition. It's a nice story. To me, it was a fundamental part of my career as a pilot. And it was also exceptionally nice thanks to the people, to the atmosphere, and mainly because of the fact that I was racing for Alfa Romeo. I could not even believe that 30 years have passed. It looked like it was yesterday. Everything started in 1993. And it is still here in my life as if it were yesterday. So, of course, he was not from your team the previous year, so I asked him, how were you hired? Well, it's a very interesting story. In 1992, I was racing in the United States, in the IndyCar series, and I liked it a lot. And I received several offers to stay in the United States and to be part of the 1993 championship. So I was basically ready to move permanently to the United States. And yes, I liked the DTM, I liked Germany, but the Indy cars were fantastic and I liked them a lot too. So I decided to stay in the United States. But once I came back home, I was home and they received a phone call from Giorgio Pianta, who was introduced by the team of Cristian Peruzzi to me and other people from Alfa Romeo, or Fiat Auto Germania, as it was called at the time, and he told me, well, he was told to call a pilot, and that's how Giorgio called me, and it was incredible because he made me an offer. So he told me that one of the 4 cars he had, well, there were Larini, Nicola, Giorgio Francia, and there was a 4th place free. So he asked me whether I wanted to be part of the Alfa Romeo family and to be the 4th man. And the team was the Schäuble team. It was very, very good and well established in Germany. So I told Giorgio, yes, I'm very interested. I think it is a great idea, but I didn't say immediately, yes, it's great, I'm coming. I said, I have to think about it a little bit because I need to consider certain things. because I wanted to do all the checks and what was happening in the United States. So I told Giorgio I would call him back after a week. And that's what happened. In the meantime, I talked to Schäuble, Fiat Germany, with the DTM team because they were very interested, because they liked for the former Formula One pilots to participate in their championship, and Sandro, Nicola and me were in the same team in our case, so they were all happy. So I said, okay, it's a nice thing. So once I was decided, I said, Giorgio, what about the budget? Let's talk about money. So he made me an incredible offer, a good offer actually, and it was a surprise. But after I committed myself, so first I committed myself and then I spoke about the budget. And for the circumstances of the time, I must say it was an excellent pay, and I was excited to start and to go fast. I wanted to jump in the car as soon as possible. I had driven four-wheel drive cars before, but not at that level, and I was very curious. I didn't know how they would react, how the engineering team would work, so I was very curious. How was the four-wheel drive car compared to the 75 which existed before, Giorgio? Well, clearly the 75 had a rear. The four-wheel drive gives you a great advantage because you can distribute the power on the four wheels, but the fundamental thing was on the four-wheel drive having it well balanced, because usually when you have the four-wheel drive it's under steering. But we had a very well-balanced car. Driving the 75 with the Dedion or whatever was not easy, but again we were able to create a fast car with a lot of horsepower, and in general it was very balanced. So the 75 was more difficult for the rear part, and with the four wheels you are more balanced. Danner was the last one to touch the car. He says it was a little bit late, but I wanted to let him speak. Well, it took a little while because the car was already very late. There was a turbo compressor version of something which already ran in the Italian championships a year before, sort of a prototype. So I waited a lot before receiving the car. I think I drove the test car in Italy for the first time. And if I am not wrong, we went to Vairano, or Varano, I don't recall exactly the name, but it's where I drove the car. I like it a lot, and I said, okay, now we have to immediately start doing the tests and go to the DTM circuits, because the DTM circuits were very different. So, in the end, I got the car, and the real test arrived only when we had the Michelin tires test. So it was late, it was at the end of the year, but it was good. It was good. I immediately was at ease with the car. And also you, Nicola, were immediately at ease with the car, because in another part of the interview he says that it's a very stiff car compared to other Turismo cars. It looked like the Citroën C Palace. It moved in every direction, but it stuck to the ground. It had a sufficient adherence. I never felt a car that was moving like that. It was not a 75, okay, but it was not a stiff car, because a Turismo can never be stiff. I also drove, he also drove the Formula One, saying that this is stiff. Well, it's a nonsense, I think, because anyway these cars have a certain limitation. You cannot go, you cannot exceed the limit, otherwise you go to the other side. You know, you have to understand these cars, you have to drive these cars, and you have to adjust them for what they are, but you cannot bring them to the extremes, otherwise. And then Giorgino, who worked on it and so it's see the light, knows it better than me. You talk about the stiffness of a Turismo car. Even though it's a sort of a half prototype, the previous one was closer to the production, to the series, the one of 1992. This one was born with another philosophy, another concept, with an engine placed in a specific way, with certain weights. So it is, anyway, a car with four-wheel drive. So let's get back to the competition. 11 wins are 3/4 of all the competitions of the championship. So which were the highlights, the unforgettable moments of those 11 victories, or of those victories you could not conquer? Well, as I told you before, when we met this morning, for sure the most memorable and nicest competition was the Nürburgring, not for me, but for a series of elements. It was unforeseen, so our competitors didn't think that Alfa could win. For many reasons, because I never saw the track before, Alfa Romeo never took part with these cars. So there was no experience, there was no feedback, there was no points of reference apart from hiring a car, renting the car, and then learning the track. So we started with unfavorable prediction. So winning with that car on that circuit, well, with double winning, it was very rewarding to us. And it gave us much more than what we did on normal circuits during the season. And from that moment, they learned that it was hard to beat us. Well, we put that victory among the 9 victories of the museum. We identified 9 victories in the Alfa Romeo history, and your victory in Nürburgring is one of those 9. So we share your enthusiasm. You know, it's 28 kilometers in total. It was difficult to set the car. You could not set the car for the GP, otherwise it would compromise the nose life. So especially in that on that racetrack, but the car was undrivable from the point of view of the setting. I mean, it was like a normal city car, because we had to find a certain compromise to set the car so as for it not to jump on the bumps and to follow well the curbs that during the compression, because there are a lot of compressions, the carousel included, had no critical behavior. So it was a series of compromises, and the pilot in the end had to interpret them in the best possible way to make it competitive. But more or less it was everyone's problem, not only of Alfa Romeo, to find compromises. And we were not favored, because in the 3 kilometers of the stretch, well, the four-wheel drive suffered a little bit. And compared to Mercedes, yeah, they touched the 300 kilometers per hour already, and we never saw those revs. So, but we had the advantage of going fast in the mixed part in order to create a gap, at least for my driving style. So I didn't want to do like they do today with the DRS in Formula 1 and losing the leadership, and every time again battling for the leadership. But it's hard to overpass. So it was a project that I thought in my head before starting to try and give them less opportunity in that stretch where we struggle a little bit more than them. So the victory of Nürburgring was a pain for many, because also Danner talks about it. Oh yes, yes, if I look back at those years, It was fantastic for many reasons. So there's not a single highlight. There were many. There were several important moments. So the first one was due to the fact that everybody loved us. The audience, the fans, and also the competitors. Also the other cars, the Mercedes, the BMW. Everybody loved us. Number one, because the Alfa Romeo involvement brought many other cars into the DTM and also a breath of fresh air. It was fresh air lifestyle and everybody loved us. So this was a very important element because it is nice to see that you are loved. And the other thing, which is connected and very interesting, is that Alfa Romeo fans weren't really treated very well over the years because they were driving Alfa Romeo. Everyone made fun of them. Oh, you with your Alfa cars, you're not interesting. And then when we started to race on Zolden for the first competition, we destroyed the Mercedes. They had no chance at all. And when I talk about all of us, I don't remember, maybe Nicola or Sandro won the competition. Maybe I arrived the third place, but it was fantastic. Believe me, all the Alfa Romeo pilots were happy. They could park. Everyone, not only pilots, but everyone driving an Alfa Romeo was happy. They could park their car in front of their office or restaurant or whatever and could be proud. So the fan came to every competition. We had an incredible welcoming experience and we proved what we were able to do, and we managed to show what Alfa Romeo was. Alfa Romeo was not only a competition car, but it was a philosophy. It was something incredible. And one of the origins of the competition was Alfa Romeo, and then Alfa Romeo became alive, it became a lifestyle, the fans were immediately super happy. It was a feeling linked to the races, the setup of the car, the performances of the car. And I clearly also remember what I wanted to do with the car. I wanted to change it completely. Well, not completely from the design point of view, but I wanted a softer car, which weren't so a wing. So I immediately started to work as I was used to. And the problem was that it was not easy to adapt. In particular, how should I say, the way the car setup was done, well, it was very, very stiff, like the go-kart cars. It had a lot of wing, a great engine, and a great shift. Nicola liked it a lot because he wanted a car like a go-kart, stiff. I'm different, and I needed some time to adapt. Limone said, no, you don't change your car, the car is like that, you have to adapt to, and you have to adapt your driving style. So I quickly adapted and I won that competition. And so when you win a competition, it's always a highlight, but from the pilot's point of view, the biggest highlight was the combination between the greatest success and the greatest deception, and that happened on the Nürburgring. We didn't do the small Grand Prix circuit, we did a competition on the extended circuit. I know very well the circuit, I knew that no one could be faster than me. So we went to do the tests, I was the fastest, and then I qualified during practice, but the engine exploded. And the reason, well, I don't think it was the idea of Pino D'Agostino. I think this was the idea of Pianta. He wanted to check how much an engine could withstand. So I was the one who did this test. I arrived last. It was very, very hard. It was hard to overpass that circuit, but anyway, I did an excellent competition. And if you watch the video, you can see that Nicola keeps looking back, and I was there arriving. So I was faster than the others, but due to that problem at the engine, I had no opportunity. Anyway, it was a great experience, and the record of the fastest lap is still there, so the fastest lap. And I think it will be forever the fastest lap for a DTM car, because now the DTM will not go back to Nordschleife. So also from the pilot's point of view, it was a highlight with some deception at the beginning, but the satisfaction for the fastest lap. So were you looking at him in the rear mirror? I was looking Mercedes. He arrived at the last lap. I saw that later on in the videos. But honestly, you know what's the problem? Honestly, for a German to be beaten in their homeland in Nürburgring, it was a great deception. And I know that just as Ludwig, but I thought I could never win before starting. Like, stay in Italy, we dominate this land. So never seeing the track, they probably had a good reason to think so. But I organized myself, I had the track explained by Walter Roll, because I wanted to discover all the secrets, grain by grain. But I was second during the qualification. He forgets this, and I lost the pole for a distraction or for a wrong strategy, because I decided to do the longer lap instead of doing the GP and then doing the rest for the qualification. And doing the longer lap, the error was we underestimated the fact that the straight line was faster, and so the chronometer probably said 250 kilometers per hour, while exiting the GP it was half that speed. But the tires went down in temperature, so it was I could not drive well the car in the first part because they were cold. Anyway, of course, he was a German man in his homeland, so he wanted to win that competition, but he forgot that I was there. So I wanted to get to this point. I did 15 laps to learn the racetrack, but the fundamental element was Walter Roll, who was there doing nothing in the box, and said, wait, I know that here you develop Porsche cars. So he was working for Porsche. And I said, can I be your passenger? And he said, of course. I said, I want to know very well where to place the tires. And that was fundamental to me. I already memorized the track. You have to draw it. Once you know how the curves are done, you have already understood most of it. But where to place the tires is a different thing. And he showed me, you see there, you need some grass. There, some grass is missing, so you have to go from here to there. So for every curve, he showed me where to go, how to manage the trajectory. And this helped me. And the official qualification, the official test, it's not like in the real circuit where you, for 1 hour, you do 30, 40 laps. It was four. It was four laps. 6 Well, 6 with the out-in or 4 in total. So what you understand, I had to find, it's 25 kilometers, 28. But with the GP, it's 28 kilometers. So there were just a few laps. You had to try and interpret it in the best possible way. So in the end, it was a success. But apart from this, if it had been the opposite, I would have killed myself, because in my home you come and you beat me, I would have disappeared from the scenes for my character. So I understand him very well. It's natural. But apart from this, he has great memories. Yes, it was very nice. It was very nice because Schubel had 2 cars, Francia's and myself. There was a great team, engineers, mechanics. Nothing was wrong. The problem was that Giorgio wanted to have Chierici and Alfa Corse to win. It was difficult to control this because sometimes I also was very fast. But from the point of view of the human aspect, it was fantastic because not only the German team with Horst Schubel, his wife Gisela, was very nice to stay with, but also the Italians. Chierici was fantastic. It was very helpful. It was great. And then the person I liked most was probably Limone, because he was the engineer, and I could talk to him, understand what he was trying to achieve, how he wanted to achieve it. I gave him as much inputs as possible. And when you're running a race car, there's always the mechanics level, the workshop, people working on the car. And that team was half Italian, half German, and everything went very well. I was happy. So if I look back to the initial part of Alfa Romeo and its impact on DTM, it was not always a success, but it was also a pleasure for me, which is still alive in my heart. And it was a very different thing compared to a series of normal competitions. Believe me, because I drove so many race cars. You work with mechanics and then you go home with the engineers. But with Alfa Romeo it was different. Everything was about the heart. And every year I won some competitions. It was nice. And the last year, it was 96, with that car, which I also drove recently in the team with Fisichella in Turin. So that car is still there, Fisico's car. It was bought by a German fan who invited me to drive the car in a historical competition. And if I look back at all those years when I was a pilot and all those cars that I drove, not only Formula 1 but Formula 2, 3000, Indy, Le Mans, the BMWs, well, any type of car, the 96 car was the best car I ever drove. With the roof, that was also a nice memory. It took some time before I got what I wanted. We were in Turin, close to Limone. We got more or less what we wanted. Almost always we got what we wanted. My level was constantly improving. And if I think at how fast these cars were, well, on the Northeast Ring, I was driving together with the DTM cars that I probably was half a second slower. Not if I take into account the leaders, but the others, it was just half a second. In 96, to remember how fast those cars were, super fast. I met Pino D'Agostino many times in Formula 1. after the Alpha days. And I still recall the way, for example, the same thing happened in 93, 94, 95. I recall how Pino gave the engines to the pilots. It was not like having a piece of metal in the back part or front part of your car. You had to go to Alfa Romeo. There was an office with Pino D'Agostino and his assistant. I don't remember his name. Chierici was there. And there was a piece of paper, a block notice, with some white sheets, not with squares or lines, like white, as if we were about to draw a Picasso work of art. And then you discuss with Pino D'Agostino about the engine that you would have had on your car and said, Christian, for example, for you, number 55, it's a great engine. This is the torque value, etc., etc. This is the power, this is the average, whatever, it is in this range. And then he took a pen with an ink, the classical pens with ink, as in the old good days, with a blue ink. And he wrote down the number in a beautiful calligraphy. And then he wrote Christian Dan, engine number 55, Nürburgring race. I still remember it. I like Pino D'Agostino very much for being what he was, not only for that, but also because particularly in 1996, he built an engine, which was a 90 degrees engine. I only had it at the end of the year, but that engine was better than any other thing we had before. And it was a pleasure. It was a pleasure to work with him because he was a real genius with an incredible character and with an incredible know-how. So it was always a pleasure, and you can probably see it. Engineer, I don't have to introduce you. You were already introduced. He talked about Picasso, artists. Well, before talk about the engines, I want to do a step backwards and talking about the great family whose father was Giorgio Pianta. So a round of applause for him. Giorgio was our father. It was him who promoted managers like Sergio Limone for the car, Enrico Alviano for the electronics, and me for the engine. And we were fully independent because he trusted us 100%. Next to him, there were two important people. Richelieu of the situation, Claudio Chierici, sports director, and the operational arm of the pilot, Giorgio Pianta, Giorgio Francia. Giorgio Francia was responsible for the development department of the car. He was official pilot and pilot for development. And next to him, he had an operational arm, which was Gianni Arosio, who is here present today. So it was a family. And we should not forget the engineer of the Nicola Larini car, Antonio Tomaini, who formerly worked for Gilles Villeneuve. In this championship, Nicola was the Senna of the situation. And for the engines, we can talk and elaborate on this. But the DTM engine was, according to the regulation, a Formula 1 with a limitation to 12,000 revs. It had the obligation to use the angle of the V and the cylinders, but it was a V60 for Alfa Romeo because The V60 was excellent in the production because the engine was very regular. Because especially on the series car, the partialized is used a lot. So having an engine which is not homogeneous but jumps is not very comfortable. But the problem of the V6 at 60 degrees was also of space. It needed 6 hinges who then had to be balanced. So the shaft was 5 kilos heavier than a race car shaft. So we developed it, we studied it, and when we tried to reduce the 60 degrees to 30 degrees, so the shaft was 2 kilos less heavy, we tested it in Magnicure, and Alessandro Nannini went off the car, said, but Pino, it was from Tuscany, oh Pino, this engine is faster than the other one, but it's as it had a long pace and a short pace, just to say what these men were. They didn't have you sleep at night. So we didn't bring to the competition that engine. And then in '96, respecting the rules, I said to Claudio Chierici and to Sergio Limone, who were also working in the Fiat DTM ADAC rule, as it was called. I said, guys, apart from what we have done over the years, we cannot do more with this engine. So Claudio Chierici spoke with Joe Bauer, who currently works in Formula One, and Joe Bauer opened his book and say, the rule doesn't say that you have to use the engine of the series brand. It says to use the engine of the company. So Carlo went to me, say, Pino, at the moment there was another company, Alfa Lancia, and Lancia had a V90 6 cylinders engine, the famous engine everyone talks about. So I had the input from the managers in Turin that we had no longer to do big developments because the championship had to come to an end. So the few money of the experimentation budget that was left, well, we did it to do the V6 90 degrees. We did it without telling anyone. We tried it at the Mugello. It was an official test. I don't know whether Giorgio recalls it. It was an official test with Opel, Mercedes. We were there with Alessandro Nannini, with a series car, and Giorgio with a prototype car. So at one point, Alessandro jumps off the car and says, Pino, I want to try the car Giorgio is driving. Why? There's something I want to see. So he took the car, did the first lap, the San Donato, and then immediately came back. Pino, I don't need more. With this engine, we win all the competitions, and out of 10 we won 9. The other one we arrived second, and we did 5 pole positions. So this is to recap our award. And when we won, I remember as if it was yesterday, Engineer Cantarella, who was the CEO, since the input was not to develop anymore engines, he called me congratulating me for what we did. When did you start working on the 6 cylinders? In 92. In 92, we did the Italian championship, and in 92, since I wanted to relaunch the TM, Mercedes studied things and invited us so that we could also participate in the championship. But we were not the side participants, as I thought. But we went there with a non-official car. Yes, correct. And by the way, we should also recall someone else who's no longer with us, the sales manager of Alfa Germania, Christian Peruzzi, who doubled the sales in '93. Do you remember? Yes. Unfortunately, Christian is no longer with us. So this was our history. That's what we did every day. Was it true that you gave the engines writing on the white paper to each pilot, as Christian says? No. Well, the V6 90 degrees, as it was done with a small budget, so the number of engines we produced could not cover all the cars. So, of course, in the beginning, we used them on who had the chance to win the championship, and then we did 2 per each Grand Prix, and we could give them to everyone. But in the beginning, I had no money to have engines for everyone. The budget was important. Thanks again. And talking about something else, engineer Alviano, there was a lot of electronics in the DTM, much more than on the other cars. Well, in the beginning, this car, in 1993, when we started with the new engine, well, of course, we had to identify what could be the electronics part to manage this engine, and we only thought about managing the engine at that moment. Of course, in the historical archives of Alfa Romeo, to that point, there were some electronics for engines with a lot of multiple cylinders, but there were problems with Marelli, the supplier at the time, so we never managed to do more than what we did with Bosch. So, since we were using the Marelli system in the GTA, but the GTA was 4 cylinders, it was a 4 cylinders, even though it was overfed. So we had to identify with Marelli components for a multi-cylinder engine with 12,500 revs. So Marelli, in those times, as today as well, follows full-time the activities of Ferrari in Formula One. So we decided to adopt the system that Ferrari used the year before to control the motor, because at the same time Marelli was developing for Ferrari a second evolution of electronics. So on this car we have basically the electronic system that Ferrari used in '92. So of course it was just the beginning with Marelli, with this car, because up to the previous car we used Bosch, as I said. And of course, on this supply of components of electronics by Marelli to Alfa Corse, there was the spark which then saw the explosion of the electronics multinational, these cars, because Pino created an engine which was fast, light, high performance, but this engine had to drag an alternator that could deliver energy for such a car. Of course, Marelli had the alternators for the Formula One, which were non-efficient for these cars because they were too small, or the rallies ones, which were hyper-efficient but too big and heavy. So then we remembered that when we were working with Bosch, we met the person who was responsible, Hugo Zucker, who in the meantime became director of TAG Electronics, which was working for McLaren. Zucker, yes. Uro Zucker. So we contacted him, and TAG Electronics opened the market of electronics for Formula One, because in the meantime the federation limited the electronics activity for Formula One. So almost all teams which did big developments and investments were trying in the DTM application to recover part of the budget they spent. So they opened books on the things that could have been applied on a car. And with this access key with the alternator, which TAG Electronics then produced for us, 3 kilograms lighter and 20 millimeters smaller, but we tried the activity with TAG Electronics. Of course, in order not to remain only with TAG as a sole supplier, Giorgio Pianta organized a meeting also with Williams, because also Williams offered to show us what they could have provided us for this car. And we did a nice tour with Giorgio, Pino and Sergio at Williams to see their technologies. And that's where we watched short movies that they developed with a continuous Van Dorn shift that they were developing for the Formula One at the then Formula One band, but which was impressive. The active suspension systems, the active tests for suspensions. So, let's say in those years we started in the development stage of that car with a first approach which was simple, but around this model of application we started to think what else could have been added. And in 1996, with the last car that went on the track, had differential controls, setup controls. It had a lot of controls and something fun by reading the rules. The rules said that if the tires on one side of the car were not inflated, no part of the car had to touch the ground. So our system had, independently from the electronic control of the car, another system that lifted the car when the tire was down. So we respected the rule, but in a way which was not completely compliant. So this was what electronics allowed us to do. We had differential control, we had, of course, telemetry system, because these competitions could also be won if you looked at consumption, because these cars, these races were linked to the consumption. We had 100-liter tank, and there were 2 races. So, as I guess also the others, we were always very tight with consumption. So part of the race had also to be managed in terms of performance and consumption. And if you see, starting from this version, the pilot had possibilities to select different maps according to the consumption that those maps allowed to have. So from the side, we could give them indication. So if they were in the target consumption during the race or not, something that today everyone does in Formula One, and this is shown also on TV, but at the time it was not that easy to have these data, because there was a telemetry, but there were a few problems still, because it was in the beginning of that era. The trees in Monza didn't allow us to see the car in certain parts, but it was fun as well, because then the electronics that ended up on this car came from many different companies. For example, Marelli, TAG Electronics, KLCAs, which was in a moment when it wanted to offer Fiat products for production. And based on this, we had the development of ABS in almost for free. At a second moment, Bosch arrived for the ABS. So the technical meetings of electronics that we organized were fun, because around the table there were basically the suppliers of electronics of the series car, because we were talking about important brands that equip the cars. So I did similar meetings when I then did some activity for the experimentation of the cars in Fiat. Some meetings with the different suppliers of the same element, and it was not that easy. They didn't want to discuss everything because everyone was there hearing. So maybe I was saying that before, many of those suppliers who came to this meeting to Settimo to make the point of the situation before or after a race, well, the first thing that they asked me was to have a tour at the Alfa Museum.
Come dare torto.
But at what level did cars arrive in '96 with the regulation that allowed you to do a lot? Well, we could do the electronic management that could do Formula One when it was banned. So it was just a beginning, but then we didn't go on the active suspension systems just because Giorgio Pianta, with the teams of Open, etc., in order not to try to raise the cost too much, decided to not go on with the active suspension system. But for the rest, we had everything from ABS to differential control. So we had everything. Breakage, repartition. So the control managed also all the hydraulic part, because we should not forget that these cars, when they started to be active in terms of power actuation, needed a high source of energy. And a high source of energy were the hydraulic systems. So this car had hydraulic switchboards, which were extremely complex in terms of architecture, that worked in order to maintain the sizes of the actuators as small as possible in order for them to be light, but with very high pressures from 200 to 150 bars. So there were situations of these components which were extremely complex. In '96, a car, before starting in the morning, needed an external hydraulic circuit. So we had a system connecting to the car, oil circulated in the entire system under pressure in order to clean the system, even though the night before the car was parked. But we had to do this cleaning of the system, which lasted almost 1 hour, in order to eliminate all the impurities that could block the control valves. So basically it was a technique, and it was Tag Electronics which taught us this technique, so deriving from what was done in aeronautics in the airplane. So hydraulic systems of airplanes had this kind of washes. The oil that we were buying was oil coming from the aeronautics world, very expensive. It was one of the technologies, one of the know-hows that we had to learn to know in that period, because before we could not even think we could have 200 bars systems. We didn't have this kind of machines that needed to lift such big weights, but in order to manage the shifts, the differentials, the suspensions, because that was the case too in the beginning, it was needed to develop these technologies, which were basically coming from the aeronautics world. So out of the golden pilots that the Quadrifoglio commemorates, we also had another contribution by Sergio Limone, who could not be here in person. Hi everybody. Ardizio invited me to this meeting, and unfortunately I could not be there in person, but I'm happy to send you a message. Well, the DTM of '93 was in my career one of the milestones. So it shares first place with 83 of the rallies. Maybe it's a number 3, which is a good luck number. So we were sent because Lancia finished operations, and so we started with Alpha, and the new door opened. It was very fascinating, and what was fantastic was the fact that we had in front of us a white page, a blank page, and we had to draw a car that had to be competitive and winning. And so this was the case. We were all very good in creating quickly a team. 92 was the test year with a 55 GTA, which was used to test it also on the Italian Championship. And then we went to Germany. I recall the welcome that the Germans had for us in September 92 when we went with 2 GTAs, one from Landini, one from Dini. And we received a very warm welcoming from the Germans. And that tells a lot about the fascination that this car had. And then we arrived, we played very well the 93 season. And I repeat, it's one of the best successes in my career. Of course, the first question that I ask him is, when did the project start? Do you have something to add? Since he was talking, Enrico was talking about automation and such. There is a nice episode to recall. Together with Giorgio Francia, we went to the Mugello to do some tests. And these tests, there was also a test of the braking control. So these tests were being done by Nicola Larini. So the first lap, unfortunately, at the San Donato, plus became minus, and instead of braking, Nicola goes straight. We arrive with an ambulance. Nicola is in the ambulance and I'm with Nicola. So we go to the hospital to do the checks. At one point, his former wife, Barbara, calls me and said, "Pino, I want to know." And I said, "Pino is okay." And she said, "How can you tell?" And I said, "Because 5 minutes ago, he told me, please, when you go to the hospital, insist for them to have the entire checkup, because I have to do that so I can save money. I have to renew my license and I can save money if I do all the checks." You shouldn't have said that. But it's true. So when Enrico was talking about all the mix, the tag, the Marelli, Bosch, I was already thinking about how many times I went to the hospital for all these things. Because I went to the hospital many times, so all the electronic part created a big mess. Because having all these appliances to communicate was huge. Oh, am I wrong? It was a difficult feat, as Enrico said. They put on the car everything that was banned in Formula One. Plus we had the ABS, which in Formula One never arrived. So you can imagine how sophisticated this car was. It is true that I had to give up to many races because the car could not even go out from the boxes, but it was something that was needed, and they did their best in order to make all these systems work and communicate. So when we talk about 96 today, well, how can a customer, a private customer who bought the 96, how can he drive the car? Because it's a car that it was hard for us to drive. And then I was explained that I simplified it, they took away many things, but these cars were very complex. So for the ABS, I went a couple of times to the hospital. But the electronics task in the racing car is like being under a very dangerous situation, because they come back to the boxes then, and so it's dangerous if you do something which is not right. So he did all the things that were not risky. This is not the case. Yes, it is true. So let's get back to Limone. Yes, the project of the car was born in 2 steps. There was a step of sort of training with the GTA from 1992 when we understood, especially from my point of view, because in Abarth I dealt on behalf of Alfa about the car. So we had a lot of experience. I thought it was sufficient because we worked with 6 world championships with 4-wheel drives. And I understood that instead it was very hard to have a 4-wheel drive run fast on the racetrack. I remember the first tests by Giorgio Francia. If he's there, I would like to send him a goodbye. He's a dear friend, we shared many moments. And he complained that the car jumped during the curb, and when I tried it, it was like a kangaroo. So understanding why it jumped so much was not easy. It was very, very difficult. And then in the end, we managed to do that, and the car stick to the ground. So this experience was the experience of the end of '91, and in '92, when the GTA was racing, I was racing. In Turin, because I had contact with Milan, of course, with Pino d'Agostino, which I would like to also, which I would like to send my greetings. So there was a great team, Limone, D'Agostino and Alviano, not in this order, but they managed, without having a technical director, because we were friends for a long time, we worked together very well, it was the 3 of us and we did a great job. Let's say that 1992 was devoted to the planning, and then we came out with a prototype Campo Volo here in Turin. Well, it was November the 17th, 1992. And immediately we had a problem linked to a misunderstanding in the oil circuits. And then after a night of work, I managed to fix the car. The car the next day was okay. And so we developed it, and this led us to work first with Michelin, which was partner for the tires and also official sponsor. 2 cars were still Pirelli, but most of the work we did it with Michelin, Locaro. Then in February with 2 cars, and we closed the qualifications a little bit. Sorry, we finished the test a little before the presentation at Hockenheim by testing the car in Zollberg with 2 cars, development cars, and then we started the real races. And the question that I did to him and that I will also ask you is, when did you realize that the car was competitive, was really competitive? Well, saying yes, it's very easy today, but as every time we start with a new regulation, as it was in '87 with rallies, well, it was a card which was played with risk, because Mercedes has the 190 EV2 with DTM norm, so for certain parts it was better because it had a dry carter, so they did nice things. The others homologated a Lona Group A, which could not be used in Class 1, but the car, I would say, well, everything was new for us. So we had trust in the reliability because we did a lot of kilometers, a lot of tests. At the end, we arrived at almost 4,000 kilometers of tests. So with a racing engine which has to be replaced every now and then, well, it's huge, it's something huge. Like an industrial vehicle experience, it was an effort by the entire team, Abarth, Alfa Corte united in order for Alfa to win. And then another question I asked is whether the warm welcome was still warm after the first wins. Well, let's say that the welcoming was very warm. I remember that they baked us a cake, a beautiful cake in Zolder. They were very happy for sure, because beating Alfa Romeo would have been for them the maximum, the best, to beat a historical brand in Germany. And in Germany, thanks to Nuvolari, it had won a lot. So it was a great competitor to beat. They were very happy. But when they understood that it was not easy to beat us, and they had to fight, well, things changed. But I must say, I always had the impression that they were never incorrect, or that they never cheated. I had a relationship with Lettner, who was my equivalent for the regulations. He followed every regulation in Paris and in Germany for the DTM, and I did the same thing. So I already knew him for the federation work we did together. We always had a very collaborative relationship, very respectful. So, of course, they did their thing. Also because as for every national championship, the original language of the regulation is Israeli, so they wrote it in German, and so they interpreted it in German. So there were certain elements, for example, you had to interpret it to discover that you could modify the bottom part of the car. So in 95, 96, we modified the car with the ground effect, but we were always behind due to the fact that they played at home. So I don't remember specific episodes of them not being correct. Maybe between pilots, some bumps, but that's something that is very common in Formula One. But is it true that it was difficult to interpret the regulation in German? No, well, if he spoke, because he spoke German. I studied German in high school. But Sergio was an expert. He always worked in the world of rally, so it was easy for him. But we had no conflicts. There was a great collaboration, also with our competitors. There were no conflicts. It was really a nice environment. And also the audience was enthusiastic, and when the Formula One world discovered that the DTM was growing, there were some actions to calm it down, and the DTM came to an end. In 95, Hockenheim, where our competition was the last competition of the year for DTM, had more public than the Formula One Grand Prix that was held 2 weeks ago. And this can explain many, many decisions taken afterwards. Yes, it was a period when the Formula One suffered some problems. But the opinion is unanimous, and I underline this. So you had a great team. Yes, I remember there was an immediate bonding. Of course, we had experiences which were extremely different. And we all put together the humbleness to learn. It was something new to us, like this kind of racetrack, because I had a different experience. I had not much experience on the racetrack. I was assistant to development for S033 for Fiat, but which was very marginal. But the fight on the racetrack, well, I didn't have that experience. because I was born with the rally, I will die with the rallies. But it was a nice experience. I learned a lot. I must say that the racetrack is extremely precise, rewarding on certain details. The rally is more, or maybe if it's more my character, it has different spaces. But that's not the point here. It's not the right way to remember it. There was this season, 1993, after which came difficult seasons. 94 was kind of okay. 95 was extremely difficult because Germans did some changes in the regulations. I'd like to make a book on 155 and 56. I was researching for dates and I saw that the chassis arrived in January. We finished it in February, so it was a rush. And the Alfa Corse, waiting for the deliberation of the pieces to assemble it, so they finished to assemble it in the Hockenheim box, which is not nice to do. So it was a really difficult season. We had a 94 immense mode. In 96, the car showed to be very competitive. It won a lot. We didn't win the championship, but the car was up to the situation. So I must say that 93, well, opened 4 years of battles with a car that left a mark. So the DTM 93 has a special place in the history of Alfa. Just like I can say that the 155 T2 was another great experience, but probably you will commemorate it next year, 2024, since it was 94. I will be there if you do that. Well, Limone says several times that he researched for dates, and so when we talk about history, our backstages are full of names, data, dates. Many of these come from the archive, the documentation center, and others from direct witnessings from the protagonists. But many of these dates are blurred because they are lost in the digital, which in the 90s started to arrive. Some materials were starting to be lost. Not everything was traceable. There were no longer written letters. So sometimes the accuracy is lost when we try to recreate history. That is why it is extremely important the work of some historians and researchers outside of the museum. Also outside business, I would say, because they are driven by passion, but they are extremely professional. That is why I asked to Rudolph Jansen, who comes directly from Amsterdam, for us to share with us some data, some curiosity, because I'm sure that very few of you know how many cars were produced, how many cars each pilot drove. This information is information that looks negligible today, but we would pay any kind of amount to have the same accuracy for the data of the cars from the 30s. So I would ask Rudolph Jansen to talk us about important things. So I created within a timeline. So when the program was open, when the engine was used for the first time, when the contract with the pilots were signed. So these are the head-heads tests with the two first cars, the development cars. And this is all part of the donation that Sergio Limone did to the documentation center, because we should not forget that archives are born not only because the company collects documents, but also because people collect documents. At a certain point they decide to enrich our archives. Sergio Limone gave us a lot of material that, starting from today, will help to recreate the details of this story, also with the help of people who can navigate through these archives. Limone, Rudolph, who will help us catalog this. And then we have 93 with the presentation, the technical check, and the first competition. Now I would leave the floor to Rudolph, who I thank for being here, and will also be translated, but I'm sure that you will be amazed.
Okay, Giorgio, thank you so much. Thank you everyone for joining this conference. So the championship. Yeah, to start first, what makes this championship so special? Imagine in a new country to Alfa Romeo, and with new regulations, as we heard, some in German. Working across different locations, Settimo and Chivasso, working across different cultures, Abarth, Alfa Corse, and last but not least, working in an environment in Fiat Group. There was a lot the team had to do, so it's not just, let's say, the protagonists who are here today, but also a few of the mechanics. I know that there's at least one here today, the cook, the logistics, the trucks, everyone involved with Alfa Corse made this happen. But I think it is one person who managed to manage this all and stick this all together. So thank you, Mr. Giorgio Pianta. About the championship, DTM 93, so there were 10 official races and one, call it a show race in Donington, DTM on tour. So it is racing that we are interested in, but at the end of the day, it's also a business. So let's start with the results. So the team Alfa Corse ended number 1, Schubel number 3, the drivers number 1, Larini number 5, Danner, Francia number 6. If you would have had probably, let's say, Michelin tires all season, who knows? And then number 7, Nannini. So the question people sometimes ask is how many cars were produced, cars like that car, so-called SE052. There were 12 cars produced, as Sergio Limone already mentioned. There were 2 development cars. Of the 12, 11 were used throughout the season. And another fact is that Alfa Romeo took this very serious, and they were first considered as another Italian team, but I think everyone in Germany realized this team was very professional, very organized, very structured. So throughout the season, so before the season, Alfa Romeo already developed this team, and other team members were not here, around 116 evolutions of the car. Another overview I wanted to share with you today is the cars, how they were used. So each pilot, so Larini, Nannini, Francia and Danner, each used 4 cars in the season. And in addition, the last race, Giudici also drove one of the 93 cars. So the driver, so Nannini, unfortunately not here, but this is his first car. Our champion, Nicola Larini, in one of his 4 cars. Christian Danner, Giorgio Francia, in one of his 4 cars. And finally, the last race in Hockenheim, Gianni Giudici, who also drove one of the 93 cars.
Just one curiosity. What is the car, what about the car which belongs to the museum? Can you tell us?
Well, first of all, it's one of 12, so it's an original car. And this particular car was used by Alessandro Nannini in the first 5 races of the DTM 93. And then the car was decommissioned and no longer used, not as a T car.
One of the aspects which is kind of interesting and less well known is the evolution of the car along the season and even before the season. So we have, coming from the donation of Sergio Limone, a review which was written at the end of 1993, listing a series of changes that were made to the car. So, how many modifications, Rudolph?
Oh, in total 116, of which 64 in the season, in the championship, and even the final race there were 6 modifications to the car. Yes, an example is, for instance, what you see right now. So this is the protection of the front part of the car, which is a piece of titanium that was put to the car in the first race in Zolder. Maybe Giorgio or Nicola can speak about this.
Do you remember the reason why? If we look at the pictures, we see cars that had to withstand a lot of events. So we did protections to the sparks, no? So even if they touch the ground, nothing could catch fire.
Another evolution that is in the second race of the '93 championship was one of the challenges was temperature everywhere in the car, particularly the interior of the car. So the second race, only for Nannini, they put a tube directly attached to his helmet. Also mentioned as an evolution is that in that second race was the first time that Alfa Romeo introduced the first T-car. And having said that, in Zolder, this particular car driven by Nannini broke down in the first manche, and the second manche Nannini used a T-car, which was one of the 2 development cars. One of the, I think maybe the most well-known evolution is the special gear, let's say the levels for Alessandro Nannini.
It is not exactly an evolution. If you remember, Alessandro Nannini had a bad helicopter accident. So he lost part of his arm. So we discovered that Alessandro, when he had to change gears, was losing a few split seconds. So it was Sergio Limone who was able to make a double lever gear, so that in both ways Alessandro could only push and not pull, because he lost split seconds when he pulled, not when he pushed, because he was losing sensibility after the accident. So it was Sergio Limone who invented this. I think I tested it because I was always the first to try the car, every car, until I said yes. The car didn't go to the pilots, but the final, let's say, authorization, it was me who said, okay, this car can go on the racetrack. Then I discussed with engineers, but it was the 2 Giorgios. Well, let's say that in those years I was the same, they always trusted me. I was the only one, at the time I was left alone, but I still remember that we were in Mugello. I stopped saying, the car is jumping, and everyone was looking at me saying, he is crazy. And I said, no, the car is jumping. Okay, you go to that curve, and I'm gonna show you that the car, is jumping. But also thanks to them who trusted me, and they trusted what I said. Now it's easier with computers, you do everything. In the past there was a trust with the engineers, pilots, so we had to collaborate. It's not that we trusted 100% you, because the car from '96 almost 52 million liras at the time of sensors to check what you said.
Another example of an evolution introduced in Donington when Nicola received a new car was this part, and maybe Nicola, you can speak about it, or?
Did you have problems of overheating of the brakes? Honestly, I do not remember this detail. Probably, yeah, I complained about something, but it might have been a generic problem. And he said I was the first, so probably it was due to the fact that it was leading in the championship. So if there were modifications to apply, well, they did that always on the leading car. But if I had it, I'm sure that also Giorgio had it, because he developed, and as he said, everything had to pass by him before. So I don't know whether you remember. I was the only one having that. I cannot remember this, but I'm sure that if we had an evolution, yes, of course it was first on your car and then on the other cars as well. But if there was only an element available, it was on your car first, because it was obvious, because you were fastest, so you were leading the championship, so the system was correct. But as always, if there are modifications that works, but if there's only one, it goes on the winning leading car. This is something which is more difficult to explain, right, Rudolph?
Yeah, for me it's hard to explain, that is true, but it's one of the modifications which I think is interesting, coming from the NASCAR. So, yeah, this is an interesting photo for two reasons. So one is the evolution of the mirror, and another thing that makes this photo interesting is the snakes on the photo. And the snakes, and I'm pretty sure that Nicola can talk about it.
We were talking about the snakes before, that Larini glued to the doors. Yes, the snakes that are visible here are also visible there, and they meant a victory. It was a snake eating the Mercedes star. It was the idea of our team manager, who always had fun ideas and inventions. So he had some of them printed, and for each victory he glued these stickers. It was fun. Fun for us, of course, not for Mercedes. And then when this rear mirror was applied, we call them serpentelli, like the small snakes. Well, after this rear mirror was placed, they were stick to the doors. This was used to include air inside, because when the season got hot, the cars were super hot, the air inside was unbreathable. This is a problem of engineers, and I'm explaining why. Engineers want cars to be as sealed as possible, because if there is air coming in from the inlets or windows, etc., which is not dynamic, breaks the car for them. So they had to be sealed they didn't calculate the fact. They say, okay, we are faster than 2 split seconds, but I don't think that after half of the competition the pilot cannot see anything, cannot breathe, because there's no oxygen, so you lose half a second. No, it's more important to gain less than half a second. So with Tomaini we fought, because he was responsible for third part. There was Limone, but Limone was more on the operational side. But in order to have them open a small hole, well, that would have been impossible. I don't know whether he knows that, but at Nürburgring I had another modification applied to the car. Let's see whether he knows it. To cool something in the car. That, yes, was effective, because it brought air directly to the tube, and then you had inside another flexible tube connected. You could have it in your mouth, on your belly, so you could place it wherever you wanted during the competition. Also considering who was in front of you and behind you. Of course, there were filters, but if there was something in front of you, you didn't have very clean air. So it was better than the hot inside, but not super clean. So in order to change the oxygen, we needed filters. So let's see whether you have this detail as well. Limone put it in the list.
I already lost one test today. That's enough now. I don't know the other one. Yeah, as mentioned earlier, so until the final race, Alfa Corse team continued to develop car and introduce evolutions. Hockenheim final race in October, they tested 2 different wings. And this is one of the wings. I think this was probably looking forward to the 94 season.
In the end, what was the other modification of the Nürburgring, Nicola? So there was a special helmet with air inlets above, and I took directly the air from the rear mirror. It was not compliant with the regulation, of course. I discovered it later on, but the race was over. Rudolph, do you want to tell us what happened after 93? Both in the DTM, but also in the other competitions that run in parallel or that came after the DTM.
Yeah, if you look at the 12 93 cars, after 93, some of them were used in DTM 94. Also, one of the 93 cars was taken into the hills in 94 by Stefano Bucciero. By the way, the GTAs with Nicola and Giorgio already also entered the hill climb races in 93. And from 95, Antonino Lavecchia drove one of the 93 cars in the hills and collected a couple of championships with the not with the 93 car, but with the 94 car and the 96 car. So where are the 12 chassis today? One was destroyed in 1993 by one of the German drivers. I think it was one German driver, Danner. 8 are let's say, well, they still exist from Asia Pacific to the United States. And 3, we are still searching for them. So here's a photo of Bucciero in 94 in their first hill climb race with a 93 car. And 95, Antonina Lavecchia. And the final photo that I have, that is Danner thinking that he was driving a Lancia Delta.
Well, first of all, I would like to thank you all. Well, we exceeded our usual 1 hour, but we had so much information that was incredible listening to you. I have a last link of people to thank, the speakers, Nicola Larini, who was the protagonist of that year. It was a pleasure to have you here, and I hope there will be many other occasions. Giorgio Francia, you are a milestone of the backstage. I will call you again. Pino D'Agostino, thanks again. You were considered Picasso, so I think that this made your day. And thanks also to you, engineer, because we always talk a little about electronics, but in those years, these cars became labs with technologies that could not even fit on the Formula One. And thank you, Rudolph, because your effort is amazing and you're helping us to put some order to these documents where not only the memory is needed, but also absolute precision in organizing the dates. Then I would like to thank Fabio Soldi, who made this possible, and I thank Alfa Romeo Club Dolomiti, which adopted this backstage, and many members are here. Luigi Mandracchi organized the big group. So I thank the speakers because they are the protagonists, but the biggest thank goes to the audience. We're always here, enthusiastic and numerous, happy to spend a few minutes more than expected. So see you next month and have a great rest of your day.